This wrap up almost didn't happen because I might have gotten sucked into a Sea of Thieves spiral this month. Hi friends, welcome back, or if you're new here, my name's Destiny, and today I wanted to bring you the second half of my June wrap-up. If you haven't already seen the video I posted a couple of weeks ago, I decided recently that I would start doing mid-month and end-of-month wrap-ups instead of just one wrap-up a month. So the things that I read during the first 2 weeks of the month are actually going to be in that video, and I'll link it below if you want to see it. But for now, we're just going to go over what I read in the second half of June, which was very close to being nothing. I spent most of the second half of June doing nothing but playing Sea of Thieves with my dad and my spouse. If you're not a gamer or you haven't heard of Sea of Thieves, it's this online game where you play multiplayer and you play as pirates and you go out and pillage and plunder together, and it's really, really fun. But I finally got back into a reading mood over the last few days, and so literally almost everything on this list is stuff that I read in the last like 3 or 4 days. Anyways, the first book I want to talk about is The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon. I finally finished this and it was so good. I had gotten like halfway through this weeks ago and I put it down because partially I got really busy and I wasn't really in a reading mood, and partially because I was really scared of how it was going to end. And seriously, the biggest shout out ever to Jules for being so patient with me, because this was supposed to be a 10-day buddy read, and I think it took me like 6 weeks, and I'm so sorry, Jules. This was so good. This was honestly one of my favorite endings in any book that I've ever read. It was so good. I am just so amazed at some of the things that Samantha Shannon comes up with and how good she is at writing out these very intricate scenes. Next, I read Venus in the Blind Spot by Junji Ito. This was a new e-arc I gotten of his upcoming horror manga collection, and it's some of his stories and some of other authors' stories that he's adapted into a manga format, and it was really good. It was actually one of my favorite things that I've read by Junji Ito so far. I think I gave it like 4.5 stars. I will say that it lacked some of the just outright weirdness that people are used to from his writing. So if you've never read anything by Junji Ito before and you're a little bit nervous about bizarro horror, this might actually be a really good introduction to his work, to kind of get a feel for his style without dealing with just how over the top some of his stuff is. That said, I really enjoy the bizarro aspect of his work, so you know, I wouldn't have minded this being a little bit weirder, but it was still really fun. Next, I read The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. I buddy read this with my friend Bex, and I think we both really liked this. I will say that in the end I ended up only giving it 3.5 stars because I did really struggle with the main character a lot. The premise is that it's about this woman, Lena, who several years ago, her fiance stood her up at the altar and blamed his brother. He said that his brother had talked him into leaving her, and his brother had been drunk the night before the bachelor party, so he has no memory of what he would have said or anything. So he's kind of carried this guilt for all these years, and Lena has formed this entire grudge against Max, the brother. Now we fast forward a few years, and Lena is a wedding planner trying to get a new job, and she ends up having to team up with Max to try to get this job, so she kind of has to put her grudge aside, and she ends up learning that there's a lot more to him than what she thought there was, and he's really not that bad of a guy, and so on and so forth. It was cute. It was a really fun premise and everything. I wasn't sure how much I would really like the premise until I got into it. That said, Lena has such a grudge against Max, yet she has like really no hard feelings against her ex-fiance, and he's the one who actually stood her up at the altar. So I really struggled with her character a lot. She does grow on you, and she definitely develops a lot as a person throughout the book, so I loved her by the end, but there were moments during the first half or so of this book where I really just wanted to shake her. Like, I was like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you blaming the wrong person? Other than that, it still really wasn't a perfect read for me, but it was still a lot of fun, and it had some really good commentary. Lena is actually Brazilian American, and there are some really great discussions on how women of color are often not allowed to express themselves to the same extent that white women are, because they're seen as overreacting or being irrational or whatever. And I thought that was a really nice touch, because that's something that I don't know if I've really ever seen discussed very much in romance books or in contemporary books at all, and I thought that was a discussion really worth having. Next, one of my favorite reads this month was actually an audiobook, and it was Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Galey. I have been meaning to read this for a while. I'd only ever read short stories from Sarah Galey before, but I really loved their writing style, so I was really excited to finally pick up one of their full works. I was not disappointed at all. This story was so good. Upright Women Wanted is a western with some kind of dystopian elements, I guess. The main character, Esther, is running away from home because the woman that she used to be in a relationship with was just hanged right in front of her. So, you know, she's already really just been traumatized, and she sets off to join the librarians. And the librarians are this group of women who distribute like approved materials to bases all over the country, and they're supposed to be very moral and ethical. She thinks that if she goes and joins these women, that basically they can fix her, because she's been taught that being queer is a sickness basically, and that is something to be very ashamed of, and that she's gonna just ruin everyone's lives just by loving other women. So naturally she's thrown for a bit of a spin when she gets to the librarians and find out that they're all queer. It was absolutely fantastic. The love interest is non-binary, and the non-binary rep is own voice, so Sarah Galey is also non-binary, and I absolutely loved the love interest side. They are so cool. Like, they're so badass. They're really up in your face and everything, but at the same time they have this very playful air to them that's just really fun. Watching that relationship kind of start to form was really great, but also I just really loved the queer rep in general. I loved how strong these people were, in the fact that even in the face of complete oppression, they were finding ways to be happy and to live their lives and to make it work. And yeah, I gave it 5 stars all day long. Easily one of the best things that I've read in June, and I recommend it so highly. Next, I picked up a poetry collection, and that's a collection of Dreamscapes by Christina Singh. This was actually an arc that I've been meaning to get to for a while, and I'm glad that I finally did because I really enjoyed it. Christina's writing is so beautiful. If you don't really like horror, but you're wanting something that is more of that dark fantasy that really does get kind of gritty, I would say that this would be a really good pick for you. There is a whole section on fairy tales, and it's kind of these little bitty like retellings of fairy tales. That was probably my favorite part of this collection because they were so good, and I really liked how some of the fairy tales would feed into the next one. So yeah, if you're someone who enjoys poetry collections, especially in the dark fantasy vein, I definitely recommend this. Next, I read Finding Fairies by Roland. This was an e-arc that I gotten from NetGalley recently. I actually didn't give this a star rating, and this was really hard for me to review. I think because I went into it with mismanaged expectations. Without going off on too much of a tangent about my personal beliefs, I'm very fond of books about fae when it's done well. Don't get me wrong, I also really enjoy fae in fiction. That is easily one of my favorite themes of fantasy books, is whenever fae are a prominent part of it. However, I was actually raised reading a lot about the original fae stories and a lot of the really old lore, and being a witch, and my grandmother was also a witch when I was a kid, I was taught from a very young age that fae are actually a part of reality. That there is kind of another, you know, this is really hard to talk about on camera. I'm sorry. It's very difficult for me to be vulnerable about my beliefs with things like this on camera. It's something that's a lot easier for me to talk about on my blog. But anyways, long story short, I believe that fae do exist alongside us. And so when I'm going into a book expecting a book about fae and, you know, maybe how it relates to like witchcraft, because a lot of practicing witches also believe that fae live alongside us, and that is a really big part of a lot of people's craft. And then I end up getting a mixture of like some authentic information with a lot of jokes. It's kind of tough, you know, it's kind of tough to rate because, you know, to be fair, I have seen people on Goodreads mention that this author did actually pitch this book as fantasy, and I wasn't aware of that going into it. I thought that it was being pitched as a spirituality book. So, you know, that's why I don't want to rate it, because maybe that's just on me. Maybe I just went into it with the wrong expectations and I didn't know what I was getting into, and if so, that's fine. And for people who want a more fantastical approach to it, I think this book is going to be great. It has really light, quick-paced writing, and it has really beautiful illustrations. I did have a problem with the fact that it's only 200 pages, but like half of the book is illustrations and just little graphic design artwork. So I definitely don't think that you should go into it expecting to get very much information out of it. Also, the author made it pretty clear that they wanted to address many different cultures, which is great. When you have such little information in such a small book and you're covering cultures from all over the world, it's impossible to really get in depth into any of it. And that was a problem that I had, was that it's literally just like a tiny little taste of everything instead of really going into detail on anything. And so that frustrated me a little bit. But on the plus side, I did really like how much attention the author paid to the effect that climate change and humans abusing the planet basically would have on a fae world, such as the way that perhaps the reason that fae sightings have gone down so much in recent years is because we've destroyed so much of nature and by proxy destroyed so much of the fae world. I also really appreciated that the author took a lot of time to talk about the effects of colonialism on other cultures and their beliefs. For example, they kind of go on a tangent at one point talking about how scholars in the US have basically tried to debunk all of the Native American spirituality system by calling it superstitions and saying that, you know, it's just myths and stuff like that. So, you know, while there are a couple of comments that were made throughout the book where I didn't think the author was being as respectful as they could have been, I did really appreciate how respectful they were about those elements. So yeah, it's like a really mixed bag for me. I really recommend this book to the right reader. I was not that right reader, and I think a lot of people who are wanting to go into it for the same reasons as I would should probably be aware that this is probably not the book that you're looking for. Okay, now that that tangent's over, the last thing I'm going to talk about in my wrap up is I participated in the Pride Horathon. This is a readathon that was being posted over on Instagram from June 26th to 30th, I think. And it's basically just a readathon where you read as many books as you can that are either queer horror or non-queer horror books written by queer authors. I had a pretty big TBR for this, and sadly I did not get to most of it, but I did get to finish a few things. The first one was Camp Carnage This is a horror novella by Joshua Winning and Arthur Elliott Cross, and I think it's still free in the Kindle store. And it's basically an 80s slasher summer camp story with a twist in that all of the main characters are gay and it takes place at a conversion camp. This premise sounded great to me because I thought that it was going to be like a really fun kind of campy thing, and obviously I knew going into it that it was going to involve the conversion camp therapy aspect. However, I believe that both of the authors, I know at least one of them, are gay themselves, so I figured it was going to be handled, you know, in a way that was going to really work for me. Unfortunately, this whole book just didn't work for me. There was some really clunky treatment of some of the characters. For example, there is a token fat kid who every single time this character is mentioned, it's talking about him eating or him not being able to keep up with the other kids, or they're bullying him or whatever. There's also a black side character who is constantly just reduced down to the fact that he's black and he has a lisp. And so almost every interaction with him is somebody making fun of him. So neither of these things felt really great to read about. The other problem I had with this novella was just that it wasn't that murdery. I mean, don't get me wrong, the body count is high, but all of the murders are like so instantaneous, and most of them are just like very vague descriptions, and it just really felt like a lot of punches were being pulled. So I don't know, like I really expected more out of it, sadly. And I think I ended up giving it 2.5, 3 stars. Like, it just didn't work for me. Thankfully, the other 2 things that I read for Pride Horathon definitely worked for me. I read Benny Rose, The Cannibal King by Haley Piper. I have been meaning to read this for a while, and oh my gosh, it was so good. It's also set in the 80s, and it's also a horror novella. It's on Kindle Unlimited if you have a subscription. Anyways, this is about this small town that has this urban legend that they have a cannibal in their midst who arises every Halloween to eat children. His name is Benny Rose, the Cannibal King, and it follows this set of girls who are going to prank the new girl in school. So they go to her house because she lives in the neighborhood where Benny Rose always attacks people or whatever, and they decide that they're going to prank her, but then Benny Rose actually shows up, and it was so good. It was so suspenseful. Like, I really spent the entire book like you had no idea who was going to make it. You had no idea what was going to happen, what was Benny Rose's actual story and everything. I really enjoyed the backstory when we got to it. Like, it left me feeling very satisfied. The ending was so dark and just, all in all, really good novella. And then the last thing that I read for Pride Horathon was another favorite of the month, and that was The Monster of Ellendavin. Oh my goodness, I have been meaning to read this for so long. I mean, as you can see, I've got the ARC, so I've had it for a while. I mean, if this tells you anything, like, this is a pretty short novella to have this many page tabs. These were all just different lines that I absolutely freaking adored. This book was so dark and so funny though, like so unexpectedly funny, but at its core, it's just really twisted. So The Monster of Ellendavin is about this man named Johan who basically has like no memories of his childhood, and when he was a child, he decided after being really horribly assaulted that he was going to become something that people would fear. He was going to become a monster. And so he kind of taught himself how to be a monster. On top of that, he can't die. Like, he basically has this game where he injures himself as badly as he can, like throwing himself off of cliffs and stuff just to patch himself back together. And he just thinks it's fun. There's like a thrill to it. He's completely messed up in the head, which is why I adore him, because I really love characters that are just completely gone. And so he ends up meeting a young man who just really intrigues him, and he finds out that this guy is a sorcerer. And so he goes to him and he's like, I know your secret and I want to work for you. And so what he doesn't know is that the sorcerer has a plot in mind where he basically wants to like take out the city. So he enlists Johan's help. They end up like falling for each other in the process, but basically they're just doing like the most messed up stuff the entire book. And it's really great because you very quickly realize upon meeting Florian, the sorcerer, that you don't really know who the Monster of Ellendavin is. Like, maybe Johan's not the monster here. It was so good. Like, I am just such a sucker for books where there's nobody to root for and everybody is totally morally corrupt, and that was definitely this book. I should also mention I actually started this as the audiobook last night because I was going to listen to it while I was playing Animal Crossing. I got sucked in so fast that I put the audiobook down and grabbed the novella because I wanted to be able to like tab it while I read, and also because I wanted to be able to completely focus on it. However, if you want to check out the audiobook, the narrator was really good. I absolutely loved the narrator's voice for Johan. It's just really like gritty and it's so good. But yeah, that was everything that I read for the second half of June, and like I said, most of that was actually stuff that I read over the last couple of days. So it's been a very busy past few reading days, and now of course with July I'm doing the Pop Culture Readathon, which I have a really big TBR and several buddy reads planned for. So I'm really hoping that that need to read constantly is gonna stick with me, and that Sea of Thieves is not gonna suck me back in too badly. So I have a lot of reading to do, including today. After I film this, I'm probably gonna go get started on Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power, which I'm buddy reading with Storm, and I'm very excited for it. And I think that's all I had to say today. So thank you so much for watching. Come talk to me in the comments. Let me know what was your favorite thing you read in June. Did you participate in Pride Horathon, or will you participate in it next year? Because it is an annual thing that happens every June, and I'm so excited. I plan on being much more prepared next year and actually posting like a TBR video for it and everything. But yeah, just come talk to me in the comments. And thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!